Good evening. Welcome to your weekly shit show. I'm going to be your host. So you'll notice that I'm wearing a little bit more color on my face than I normally do, and I'm doing this because my boyfriend absolutely loves unnatural looking makeup. The more unnatural it looks, the better. So he also has strong stalking tendencies, and I know that the minute this goes up on YouTube, he'll watch it. So this one's for you, babe. All right, so let's get started with some philosophy, shall we? All right, this week, uh, no quiz last week because, like I said, this is a shit show. My life is a complete shit show. But this week we will have a quiz. The material that I didn't get to quiz you on will be on the exam. All this material is going to be on the exam anyway. So make sure that you did do the stuff for week 2. All of the stuff in module 2. Okay, so that needs to be done. It will be on the exam. And if you're curious about the exam dates, you can always look at the course calendar. So I have put the course calendar up on the website. If you look over on the left-hand menu and you kind of scroll down, there's a subsection that says tools. And right in there with email classmates and email the professor, etc., you should find calendar. You can go on the calendar and see everything that I have posted. I have all 3 of the exams on there. You'll notice that there's not a final exam. Yay! We probably will do some kind of project, though. I haven't decided yet. It depends. It depends on how much work I have to do on my dissertation in December. So, November, December. So, all right. So this week we're going to cover chapter 3. And this chapter is about personal autonomy and moral agency. So let's dig in. And I have my wine again this time. It was so much fun last time. It's like drinking wine and talking to the video and imagining you all here with me. It's like having a social event. And I'm dying for social events because I've been locked up for 6 months. And, you might think this is really a great time to finish a dissertation, but when you don't have any social activities, it makes writing a dissertation every day just like so tedious. So tedious. Okay. I'm going to start pouring out all of my emotions. It's like, I know that there are people out there somewhere. Okay, so let's do this. I got another bottle of this wine. I decided that I really liked it, so I actually got 2 more bottles. All right. What is autonomy? I'm sure that you've heard this word before, and you've probably heard it in various contexts, but I'm going to guess that none of you have actually done a real analysis about what is this. All right. So what is a good theory of autonomy, and what are some of the issues with the theory of autonomy that people are going to most often use? So I'm here to help. Roll up my sleeves, get comfortable. All right, let's do this. Let's dig in. Okay, so I'm following the book, but again, I'm adding material that's not in the book, so I'm giving you a little bit of a different take on the material. It's consistent with the book, but it's not all exactly the same material that's in the book. So if you've been reading the book and watching my lectures, you'll see how they're consistent, but they are not identical. So I think last week was probably more identical than any of the others. But this week, I'm going to what they call autonomy. I'm calling traditional autonomy. Okay, and at the end of the chapter, they do get into different kinds of autonomy. But I think that information is situated better in a different location. So I have organized the lecture and the lecture outline in a little bit different format than the text. But all of the information is pretty much the same. I just go into a little more detail and give some good examples. Better examples, I think, than they give in the book, but I'll let you be the judge of that. All right, so what they're calling autonomy, I'm going to call traditional autonomy. And the reason I call this traditional autonomy is just because it's a very, very prevalent view in the United States, in our common culture. So what happens with philosophy, and you'll probably have noticed this you'll notice it more by the end of the semester, but as we go through some of these ideas, you'll realize, wait a minute, this is just stuff that's a part of our culture. These ideas have been around for a long time. They've just sort of woven their way into the fabric of our society. And that's what happens with philosophy. So some of these guys sat around like hundreds of years ago, and they came up with these ideas that slowly worked their way through European society and then, over here into American society. Asian philosophy is the same way, but you'll see how it takes a while for philosophical ideas to sort of bleed into the mainstream, but they eventually do. So any of you who want to go on and study further philosophy, excellent. I think that's a wonderful thing to do. If you don't, that's fine too. But you'll eventually get into looking at things like the works of John Locke, and you'll recognize a lot of his writings in our founding documents, because their founding fathers were very interested in the works of these people. They were like, wow, these are really great ideas. We're going to incorporate them into our social documents. And then those things sort of bleed into society. So what we take for granted is just the way things are actually somebody's philosophical idea that they developed, and then it got spread into and interwoven with culture. So this notion of autonomy is probably going to be familiar to you because it's a very American notion of autonomy. If you are not originally from America, I know that Columbus State has a lot of immigrant students. So it's possible that you come from a country where this notion of autonomy is very foreign. So it might be the case that in other cultures, you're going to find the non-traditional autonomies, the non-traditional theories of autonomy to be a little bit more intuitive. And it's because this is just part of the Western philosophical tradition, which has become a part of mainstream culture in the United States. And it's very, very, very focused on the individual. Okay, it's very individualistic. There are a lot of other cultures that are not individualistic in the way that we are. They're very much more communal. So you're going to see a lot of American ideology sort of meshed together with this notion of autonomy. Okay, so let's dig in. So the first thing that we want to talk about is we want to figure out what is an agent. Now, I don't know that the book goes into this much detail, but I think this is important. So I'm a very systematic thinker. And when I'm in the process of writing my dissertation, I'm going to be very systematic in the way I approach everything. So in order to understand what an autonomous agent is, we first have to understand what an agent is. So what is an agent? Well, an agent is a being that's capable of performing performing actions that have a purpose, right? So they have behavior that's purposeful. So animals. I just pulled my hair out of a ponytail and whipped it over to the side. So I still have ponytail itch. Like when you have your hair tied up in a ponytail, anyway, I probably just have bugs. I probably just have lice or something. If you see bugs crawling around in my hair, just ignore them. They're just friendly little passengers. Okay, so agency. An agent is just a being, right? So it's a being that has a will of some kind, right? So a rock can't be an agent. It's a being that performs actions with purpose. Now, there are different ways to perform actions with purpose. So animals are generally considered agents. And it depends on the kind of context and the kind of animal you're talking about, but just the animals that we encounter in everyday existence. I'm not talking about amoebas or any of these others. I don't even know. Well, let's just keep it at like dogs, cats, birds, the things you're going to run into as you're just sort of doing life. We typically consider those kinds of critters agents, right? So think about foxes, for instance. A fox has very purposeful behavior. They go out and they hunt. They seek mates for reproduction. They defend territories, right? So they do behaviors that we can tie to certain kinds of goals, right? And that's what we mean by acting with a purpose. We can tie those things. We can explain those behaviors under certain kinds of goals. Whether or not a fox actually says, oh, look, I have this goal and I'm going to plan and organize my life so that I can accomplish this goal, that's a whole different kind of agency, right? All they have to do is have some kind of behavior that we can explain, looking from the outside, that an external observer can explain under a particular kind of goal. So foxes, dogs, cats, birds, even fish, right? Oh, like cuttlefish are super smart. Octopuses, it's not octopi. I still want to say octopi, but it's octopuses. Octopuses. That just sounds gross. Octopuses. Say it with me. Octopuses. Doesn't that sound kind of, it sounds like, I don't know, it sounds kinky. Okay, so these are all very smart animals. Some of them may actually even have enough intelligence to be considered another kind of agent. Okay, but just your basic agent is what I've just described. Okay, now humans are obviously agents, and we're very complex agents. So there are different kinds of agency. And the basic level of agency that I just described to you, most critters have that. Human beings are going to have a higher level of agency because we engage in very complicated sort of planning and reasoning and cooperation with other agents, right? So how sophisticated your society is going to pretty much determine what kind of agency you have. Now, animals like dolphins, social animals that have much more complex social structures, might actually have a much more sophisticated kind of agency than just this basic agency that I'm talking about. But whether or not they're autonomous agents is a whole other story. And we're going to get into why that is. When you look at the conditions that a critter has to satisfy in order to be considered an autonomous agent, these are pretty sophisticated. These require sophisticated cognitive capacities. And even some human beings are not going to satisfy these conditions. Children don't satisfy these conditions, right? So autonomous agency is a very, very strict, very peculiar kind of agency. We tend to think of it as like the apex of all the types of agency that there are. So let's look at the three conditions that the book outlines for autonomous agency. The first one is the independence condition. Now, as I said, an agent, you have to already be an agent in order to be considered an autonomous agent. So an agent who satisfies these three conditions can be considered, appropriately considered an autonomous agent. The first one, independence condition, is just this. A person must have the capacity to make choices and not be under the control of any external constraint or inner compulsion. Okay, so this is a loaded statement. So the first thing you'll notice, I have some things in italics. The first thing that I've italicized is the capacity to make choices. Let's start with that. What is that? And how is making choices a behavior that's different from other kinds of cognitive behavior? So when I say cognitive, I just mean stuff that happens in your head, right? Thinking, planning, daydreaming, right? Even stuff that you're not aware of, that can still be considered cognitive behavior, right? So how is making choices a very distinctive kind of cognitive behavior, right? So animals do display cognitive behavior. They obviously are governed by things that are happening in their minds. How sophisticated that is an open question. We're finding that animals are a lot more sophisticated than we thought years ago, but they might still not be at the same level as humans. They might even be better off than us. I mean, quite honestly, if you've ever looked at just a dolphin's brain, that thing is so sophisticated. Just morphologically, it's beautiful. If I were to pick a brain that was more intelligent, I would pick the dolphin brain. Just by looks, just by morphology, I would be like, that brain is a smart brain. This human brain over here, that's not that smart. So it's possible. We don't even know whether or not dolphins are smarter than us. They very well could be, right? So they could have a whole different kind of agency that we completely lack. So we just don't have answers to these questions. So we're just going to work with what we already know. And we know that humans do satisfy these conditions. Some humans, okay? So what is it to make choices? Well, and how is this different from other kinds of things that are happening? Well, look, you can have a fox. Let's go back to the fox. If you've ever watched a video of a fox or actually literally seen this, I've never actually seen this in person, but if you've watched any of these wildlife videos of foxes hunting in the snow, oh my gosh, they're amazing. Like their ears move and they're like really dialing into whatever is happening under the snow. They can hear little mouse feet or shrew feet, going under the snow, right? Because they have amazing hearing. So they hone in on it. And then their brains are calculating at immense rates, right? So their brains are doing these really sophisticated calculations, figuring out trajectory, right? They're figuring out all of these different variables for how they can approach their prey. And there undoubtedly are multiple options anytime a fox is honing in on a prey. So if you watch them, it looks like there's some just sort of decision-making going on there, right? Whether or not it's a conscious form of decision-making where they're like, well, I could do this or I could do that, it's probably not. It's just the brain calculating and coming up with the best outcome for the fox. And that's what ends up becoming the behavior. Our brains do exactly the same thing. We can actually manage the process consciously, but that happens a lot unconsciously for us too. Our brains just do a lot of calculations and then it delivers a certain outcome and we act on it, right? So, so that's something that all animals do. We just happen to have a sophisticated capacity to slow that down and to do it in a very deliberate way, a conscious way. But the brain is going to do that regardless. And the brain is constantly looking at what are the options, right? So a fox is going to have options. So when it finally pounces on its prey, whether it's successful or not, it has made a choice, okay? So, so choosing is a sophisticated capacity because it requires looking at a range of options, right? So there has to be a certain range of options in order for something to qualify as a choice. If there's only one thing that you can do and that's what you do, that's not necessarily a choice unless you can refrain from doing it, okay? So, so a choice is a very particular kind of cognitive activity. Let's see. So humans clearly make choices, obviously. Look like we're very, intentional in the way that we do things, but we actually are. So here's the thing. It may seem like we don't actually have a choice, but that's not often the case. There's a difference between not having a range of options for a particular action and having a range of options that you don't like. Okay, so some people are like, well, I didn't really have a choice. I had to do X. It's like, well, no, you actually could have done Y, or, sorry, I gotta fix this. I'm like, bugging me. Okay, stay, be good. So there's a difference between not having a range of options and having to do something, right? And even having the choice to do or not do is an option, right? So it's like, I can do X or I can not do X. That's still a choice. If you're in a situation where you literally have to X, that's a situation where you have no choice. But more often than not, we're not in situations like that. Most of the time, we're in situations where we could do X, we could not do X. That's a choice. We could do X, Y, or Z, right? But we don't really like Y and Z, so we end up doing X, right? So you have to think about the way that we normally talk, and you have to think, okay, do I really mean that literally? Probably not. Most of us are going to have a range of options. Some of them we're going to like better than others, right? So here's a case where you might not satisfy this condition. Now, the condition again, a person must have the capacity to make choices. So you have to have the capacity to identify a range of options and then value those options, right? Which one is going to be the best given, almost knocked over my wine. I'm going to have to move that because I'm getting a little bit handsy. Don't want to spill my wine. This is precious stuff. Actually, the truth is I don't want to ruin my furniture. Okay. So, you guys are probably used to this by now. I'm like, where were we? Okay, so, okay, good. So you have to value a certain range of options, right? You have to decide which option is better or worse. So you have to value them. You have to say, I'm going to rank these options, and I'm going to assign some value to them. And the brain does this automatically. It's amazing. Like neural networks, oh God, the way they're so fast, and they just go and they calculate that stuff, and boom, you have an action potential already loaded in your brain before you even make a conscious decision. That's great. Anyway, I love the brain. The brain is amazing. So you have to value these options, and that's a sophisticated kind of capacity, right? Especially if you're doing it consciously. Now, the brain is going to do this with a lot of stuff. Your brain is going to make a lot of stuff automatic for you. So getting up in the morning is an automatic process. Your brain is just going to manage all that stuff for you. So there's a lot of our lives that our brain is just doing this for us in the background. It's running calculations, it's valuing options, and it's deciding without us even being aware of what's going on. It's amazing. So a lot of our human activity is automatic. Our brains have just learned, as we've grown up, our brains have learned how to respond appropriately and beneficially to the environment, and they just do it automatically. Okay? So in those cases where our brain is not going to do it automatically, or where we have to actually deliberate consciously, then we have to have some very sophisticated capacities, right? So How do you value your options? It takes a lot of work to learn how to do this well. Decision making is not an easy thing, right? So valuing your options is usually going to be related to what is your end, right? What goal are you trying to accomplish? And so your value is going to be tied to that. Remember, we talked about instrumental value in chapter 1. So your options, you're going to think, okay, I want to accomplish a particular end or a particular goal, right? An end is just a goal that we set for ourselves. And I am going to have to think about what is the value as an end of each one of these options that I have. And then also some intermediate things that you could do, which ones are going to be instrumentally most valuable to accomplishing your end. So there's a lot of valuing that's involved here, right? So that's a sophisticated capacity. Now let's talk about, so that's the ability to make choices. See, again, philosophy. Welcome to philosophy. We're going to nitpick the fuck out of a single sentence. So that just covers the first half of the sentence. Okay, so a person must have the capacity to make choices. Very sophisticated kind of activity. Not everybody can do it. Not consciously. The brain can do it for you in certain situations where it's automatic. You would think by the time you're getting a PhD in this shit, you would know. Whatever, I just make up a word. That's what academics do. I don't know if you know that, but it's called a term of art. And if you don't know how to describe something and you don't know regular words for it, you just make up a word. It's automaticity. That is actually a word. Okay. I'm going to try to be focused tonight. Focus. I've got some jazz music playing. Makes me happy. They're saying, talking. Okay, so that's the first half of the sentence, the independence condition. We're still on the first condition. The second half of the sentence is and, right? This is a conjunction. These are actually two different conditions. So they kind of snuck two conditions in together. So you have to have the capacity to make choices and a second thing, and not be under the control of any external constraint or internal compulsion. That's a lot. They packed a lot into this. When you get into the higher levels of philosophy, you kind of separate these things out and not sort of cram them all into one thesis, but we'll work with the way they've got it. Okay, so under the control of any external constraint. Well, what does that mean? Well, that can mean a couple of different things, right? So one form of external constraint is something like, I want it to just stay. Okay, one form of external constraint is something like you're just physically constrained. Perhaps you're in a prison cell. Being locked up in a prison cell is going to restrict your range of options. So it's going to restrict your decision making. Okay, so it's just it's really sad. These people who've been in prison for a very long time, and I have a brother who has spent his entire adult life in and out of a maximum security prison because he's a psychopath and he can't get his shit together. And, it's probably a better place for him. It's better for society if he's in there. But anyway, the people who've been in and out of maximum security prisons, or even just prisons of any kind, I mean, unless they're like federal prisons that are like country clubs, but these people end up with such a restricted set of options that they don't do a whole lot of autonomous decision making. So when they get out of prison, they don't know how to function in a normal environment. It's overwhelming to them because there are so many options and they're not used to using their decision making capacities. That's part of the reason why recidivism is so high. Because these people have not been using these capacities, and the way the brain is, if you don't use it, you lose it, right? So you lose the capacity for autonomous decision making, and that makes life really difficult, right? Just being able to look at what are your range of options and which ones are the most valuable. I mean, people are just going to revert back to patterns of habitual behavior, which is usually criminal, and it's very sad. But so having your options restricted artificially by having physical constraints, that's one type of external constraint. Now, there are other types of external constraint, and those external constraints, I should have put something in my hair to make it stay. I didn't do anything with my hair, so I should quit fussing with it. Okay, this is really getting cacophonous now. So I'm playing jazz music on my stereo, my Bose, and the house next door, they have a live jazz band, and the windows are open. So I've got like live jazz band music over here and then regular. I love torture. I really love torture. I want to close the window though because it's nice weather. I hate air conditioners. Ugh, I hate them. Central air is okay, but this air conditioner I have, it's like really loud and it just blows this gust of wind right through the middle of the room. It's like hurricane force wind, just it's awful. I would rather not use it. Okay, so external constraints. You've got physical constraints, and then there are also psychological constraints, right? That are still external. And this is how an external psychological constraint works. I'm calling this an externally coercive factor. So on your outline, you're going to look down toward the end of the section on the independence condition, and I'm going to have underlined and italicized externally coercive factors. So we're going to talk about coercion now, okay? So there's external physical constraints, but this is going to be like an external psychological constraint. This is how it works. So there's this thing called coercion. And coercion is a type of force that's applied to an individual to get them to do something that they wouldn't otherwise do, right? So the thing that I have it defined here as a threatening force, right? So it's not just any force. It's not just like pushing somebody and saying, do this, right? I want you to get off the sidewalk, so I'm going to push you. That's not coercion. Coercion is where you threaten somebody or where somebody feels a threat or it doesn't even have to be a real threat. As long as they interpret something as a threat, it can be considered a coercive factor. But as long as there's a threatening force that's pushing somebody to behave in a way that they wouldn't normally behave, that's coercion. So external factors of coercion, external coercion is something like, it usually comes from people and or institutions, right? So people, suppose that you work at a bank robber comes in, holds a gun to your head and says, unlock the vault. Get into the vault and give me all my fucking money. What are you going to do? You're going to unlock the damn vault. If you can, you're going to do it. Because the option is death. And that's not a choice. You don't really have a choice. You're being forced, coerced. Ugh. I wish my body would just behave. You don't really have a choice. You're under coercion to open the vault. And if you open the vault, the robber takes the money and gets away, nobody's going to hold you personally responsible for that. They're going to be like, look, you were coerced. You're not responsible for the loss of that financial loss. The bank is not going to come back and say, well, we're going to have to take that out of your paycheck. I mean, right? It's like, okay, you just take $60,000 out of my next paycheck. That's great. You just do that, right? So nobody's going to hold you responsible for that because it's a coercive factor. Or somebody could hold a gun to your mom's head and say, do X or else your mom dies. That's coercion, right? So those are externally coercive forces. Those are things that are outside of you, that are like imposing a threat on you. So like I said, it doesn't have to be a real threat. It just has to be a perceived threat. So somebody could hold an unloaded gun to your head and that still counts as coercion because you're interpreting that as an actual threat, okay? So there's also internally coercive factors. So we've talked about two different kinds of external force that can prevent you from making an independent decision, right? So if you're locked up and restricted physically, or if you're restricted psychologically by coercive factors. There's also internal coercion. So here's a perfect example of internally coercive factors. Some people suffer from mental health issues where they have compulsions to behave in certain ways. Okay, so some people just feel compelled to have certain repetitive behavioral patterns. Right? So some people who are autistic, some people who are have obsessive compulsive disorder, right? So there are various different mental conditions that can really compel people to have these repetitive behavioral patterns. That's not necessarily coercive. It's compulsive, but it's not coercive. It's only coercive if they feel like they have to do it or else something bad will happen. Now, there are some people who are like that. A lot of people who have schizoaffective disorder or schizophrenia feel compelled to do whatever is popping into their head, right? So they feel like they have to do X. Sometimes it's a voice telling them to do it, and other times it's just an idea, just a very persistent idea that won't go away. And it usually comes with a threat of some kind, like something bad is going to happen if you don't do what this voice is telling you to do, or you don't behave in this way that you're feeling compelled to behave. Okay, so that can be coercive. Religion can be really coercive in those ways too. right? So religion is very coercive. Bad things happen to you if you don't behave a certain way. You're going to go to hell, or your community is going to judge you. The law is an externally coercive factor, right? So these are institutions. Institutions are externally coercive. But anytime you have sort of these internal compulsions or fears, like usually associated with mental health issues or addictions, right? So addictions can also be considered coercive factors because you're compelled to behave a certain way that you may not even want to behave that way, right? So there are so many different cases. It's so... I have historically had this really weird habit of looking up crazy shit on the internet, like children who've been raised by wolves or by monkeys, right? There's a whole literature, psychological literature out there about children who are raised by animals and what kind of psychological deficiencies they have because they weren't raised in human culture. So that was a fixation for a while. That was really fascinating. And what else? Oh, yeah. What was I going to say? Oh, drugs. Yes. So there is this drug in Russia. It's called crocodile. Krokodil, something like that. And it basically, it gives you vascular, it basically, I'm not sure exactly I don't remember exactly what the mechanism is, but it basically cuts off your circulation in certain parts of your body. And you never know where it's going to cut off the circulation, right? It could be at the injection site, but it could be somewhere else. And basically your body becomes, in that place where the circulation gets cut off, becomes necrotic. Necrotic means the flesh dies and it comes off. So there are people walking around with their skulls exposed, with flesh completely eaten away from bones where they just have bones. Their flesh is gone. You should look this up. It's crazy. Like the pictures, I'm like, there was a picture of a person who's like, this side of their face was just skull. And these people are walking around like this, and they're still doing the drug that makes this happen because it's so addictive they can't stop. Okay, so that's a type of coercion. That's a type of, I would take that as a type of internal coercion, right? So that's a coercive factor. They don't really have a choice. They have to do it, but it's so sad. But the pictures, oh God, it's insane that people do this and their body parts are just like decaying and falling off, and they're still doing it. It's insane. I mean, some forms of addiction are a lot worse than others, and this one, it's, if you want a really good scare, you should go look it up. Okay, so, all right, so good. Let's go back. We're going to revisit independence condition. A person must have the capacity to make choices. We talked about that, right? So we have an idea of what it is to make a choice and the kind of cognitive capacities that are required to do that, and how a lot of people just don't have that. Even children. Making certain kinds of choices is outside of the range of possibility for certain children. They get better at it as they get older, but small children, fuck that. Oh my God, they're just little compulsive little monsters, right? I do like children, but the really young ones are nuts. All right, so and then also not be under any external external constraint or internal compulsion. So we've covered all of that. All right, so that's the first condition on autonomy, traditional autonomy. Second one, competence condition. A person must have the capacities necessary to deliberate rationally about their choices. So not only do they have to be able to identify that they have choices and be able to sort of value them, like look at what are my options? Not choices, but what are my options? What are my potential choices? Options are just possible choices. They're not actual choices. We speak of them like they're choices, but they're not. They're actual or possible choices. The choice you actually make is an actual choice. Okay? So, but what does it mean to deliberate? Now, this is a completely different capacity. So I have to look at my range of options, identify them as potential options. I have to value them, and then I have to deliberate rationally about them. Okay? Well, deliberation is just the act of looking at a set of options and deciding which of them is the best. So once you've looked at your options, you identified them all, you have to figure out which one is the best. And it doesn't really seem like it's difficult, but it can be. And it can be because you have to have a lot of knowledge in order to do this, right? So you have to know things. So, well, let me go with a list of things that I have here. I don't have knowledge on here, but I will get to that, right? So the first thing you have to be able to do, this is sort of like from the ground up. First thing you have to be able to do is you have to, in order to be capable of deliberation, you have to be able to want something and represent that want consciously. Okay, so what do I mean by representing a want consciously? Well, it's not the kind of thing that your brain is just going to do automatically, right? So there are lots of things that you want that your brain is just automatically going to take care of for you. Peeing, drinking, basic bodily functions. There are a lot of other things that your brain's just automatically going to just do for you that you don't even realize. Like you want to get to school, sometimes just driving to school, you're on autopilot. Well, it's your brain taking over for you. It's learned the routine. And it's like, all right, I've got this, thanks. You can daydream about, Benedict Cumberbatch or whoever your celebrity crush is. So you can fantasize about your celebrity crush while I'm getting you to school. Excellent. All right. So being able to represent a want consciously is a completely different thing, right? So this is not an automatic process that your brain's taking on for you. This is something that you're like, all right, I'm in charge. My brain's not driving. I'm doing the driving here. I'm an autonomous agent. Okay. I want ice cream. To represent that in my mind is just to be conscious of the fact that there's this thing I want. It's ice cream. I know what it is, and I want it. I can identify the wanting as wanting. Surprisingly, that is a very sophisticated thing. Talk to children before they sort of figure out how to identify their various urges and things that happen in their bodies. They don't know what they want. They don't know whether something's a want or whether it's, trying to put tags on mental states is a difficult process. The whole process from 6 months, even younger than that, but from infancy through, early childhood, that's a really difficult time for the brain to, it's just chugging along doing immense work and starting to identify what mental states are and who has them. And it's possible for some people to have mental states that are different from yours, like a desire and a belief. These are things that are just mental states, right? States of the mind. And so you have to have the capacity to represent a want as a want consciously. Okay, so children, never going to be autonomous agents, ever. They think they are, but they're not. Second thing you have to do is you have to recognize that there are multiple ways to acquire the thing that you want, right? So you have to want something, then you have to decide, I'm going to try to get this thing that I want. That's to set a goal. Okay, so I'm going to try to get this thing that I want, and I have to recognize there are multiple ways to doing it. All right, so I want ice cream. There are multiple ways to get ice cream. I could steal it from the kid who's walking down the street with his ice cream cone. That's one way to get it. I could go to Kroger and I could buy some ice cream. I could go down to either Grater's or Jenny's and go to the little ice cream shop and get ice cream there, right? So there are a number of different ways to get what I want. And I have to recognize all of these different ways. I have to be able to identify that there are multiple ways to do this. Okay. Most kids aren't going to do that. They're going to be like, ice cream, want, take, right? It's not a sophisticated thing for them. But once you're older and we don't realize how much brain development happens in the first 12 years of life. It's amazing. Okay, so this is a sophisticated capacity. The third thing you have to do is you have to be able to assess each option. So we've already kind of talked about this with the previous condition. These are not strict lines between these capacities. So to be able to assess each option as better or worse than the others and develop sort of a ranking, right? So which one of these options is my best option? Given what? Best in what sense? Right? There are a lot of things you have to know in order to decide which is your best option. You have to know what resources you have. Do I have money? If I don't have money, and I really want ice cream and I'm decided I have a goal of getting ice cream, my best option is to steal it. I don't know if stealing it from the kid who's, already kind of macked on it. Oof. I don't know if that's a really great option, but it might be my only option. Might be my best option, let's put it that way. Because then I won't have to worry about trying to figure out how I'm going to get money in order to get the ice cream. So if I don't have any money, that might be my best option. If I have money, however, now I've got a different range of options. So given what my resources are and what I'm willing to expend, so it might be the case that I have money, but I'm not willing to spend it, right? So I might be a really, really poor graduate student who drives a really fancy car. Why would somebody be so irrational? I don't know. Anyway, so maybe I don't really want to spend my money on ice cream. Maybe I just want to save my money, so that I can put gas in my car or pay for, my car payment or whatever, right? So getting ice cream might not even be a good thing to do for me, or if I'm on a diet, right? So I have to consider what resources I have available and which ones I'm willing to expend. So suppose that I have some money for ice cream, and suppose that I'm willing to spend it. Okay, now that sets the stage here. So every time you identify a new variable, that changes your options around, right? So this is the process of deliberating. You're gonna figure out, here are all my options. How much am I willing to expend resource-wise to acquire this thing that I want? Well, that's going to change my options, and that's going to give me a different ranking of better or worse. So I have one of my devices is making noise, and I'm not sure which one. I have a whole Apple cart here. I've got like 3 different devices on the counter here, or the desk. Okay, so every time that I identify a new variable, that's going to change my options. So, okay, I have ice cream. I want ice cream. I have money to spend. I'm willing to spend it. All right, so what are my options given those factors? Which one is the best option given those factors? Well, here are the options that I have that seem equally good. I can go down to Jenny's and I can get an ice cream cone, or I can go to Kroger and I can buy some ice cream. What else could I possibly need to consider? Those are my options. Which one is better? Well, they seem equally good at this point, right? I have to have some other reason to decide between them. Well, right now, in the middle of a pandemic, maybe it's a better option to go to Kroger and just buy a gallon of ice cream there, or a half gallon of ice cream, or 16 pints, and then eat them all in one day. I think the most I've ever eaten one day is like 3 pints. That was during doctoral exams. I really needed it. I'm thinking about getting some ice cream now. I've got the final exam coming up. Woo. Okay, so I'm going to think, well, okay, what reasons might I have to prefer one over the other? Well, during a pandemic, I can go to Kroger at 7 o'clock in the morning, and there's nobody there but maybe 3 old ladies, and they're spread out through the store. So I can go in and I can get my ice cream and not have to really encounter many people. I can do the self-checkout. That might be my best option if I want to live. Okay, the truth is I've already had COVID and I survived it. It sucks, so you should avoid it if you haven't had it. But that's really not much of a consideration anymore for me. I mean, I still take precautions, but... So for you, that might be a really important factor. Like, I don't want to be exposed to COVID. Me, I'm like, I'm immune. I can lick everything. I'm kidding. I wouldn't do that. I'm still protecting myself because they don't know enough about this to know how long your immunity lasts. So I could get it again, or there could be a mutated version. It sucks. Is ice cream really worth all of that? Yes. Yes, it is. You just have to be smart about it. Okay. All right. So we've got looking at our options, we've got looking at our resources that we're willing to expend, and then deciding, all right, what am I going to do? Am I going to stay home, or am I going to go to Kroger? Do I really want to get in my car and go down there? No, it's 10 o'clock at night. Fuck that. I'll do it in the morning, or whatever, okay? That is a process of deliberation. We do it all the time. We don't always do it well, though. So there are good ways to deliberate, and then there are bad ways to deliberate. So that's the next thing on the outline is, here is deliberation. We deliberate about a lot of different things, but and we can do it better or worse ways. But what does it mean to deliberate rationally? So autonomy, this condition on autonomy, the second condition that we're looking at, which is the competence condition, is going to require rational deliberation, not just deliberation, rational deliberation. Right? We just keep adding shit. Now we're just like getting so sophisticated. Can anybody actually do this? That's a good question. I wonder, we all wonder, especially the rational deliberation part. When we get into rational deliberation, I don't know. I don't know if any of us are actually deliberating in a rational way. I think there's a lot of people who think that we're not rational at all. I don't think that, but I'm going to drink some wine. I'm going to drink some wine and shut up for like 5 seconds. I actually accomplished my goal. Amazing. Okay. I'm not going to get into detail about what rationality is because that is a whole subdiscipline of philosophy. We could talk about it forever. People build entire careers in philosophy out of talking about what is rationality. What does it mean to be rational? And what are the different kinds of rationality? There's theoretical rationality, there's practical rationality, there's so much, right? Okay, so I'm just going to say a few words about this. There are rules and standards that you have to satisfy in order to be considered rational. It's a normative domain. Rationality is a normative domain. There are rules that govern rationality. And you have to satisfy those conditions in order to be rational. So, what we consider good deliberation is usually something that's done in accordance with the rules of rationality. What we consider bad deliberation is something that's not done according to the rules of rationality. That's the way we think about it in philosophy, okay? I think we kind of think about it that way too, just colloquially, right? So if you know somebody who's not doing a rational decision-making process, it's like, well, let's see. Here's a really irrational deliberation. Should I study for my logic exam, or should I not study for my logic exam and go to a party instead? That's tough. I really want to go to this party. That really hot guy's going to be there. I really want to check him out. You know, and other stuff maybe. Like feeling like hooking up, right? Am I speaking to the college students here? Okay. So, all right, so how am I going to, these are my options. I got to figure out, well, what's the benefit? Which is the best option given what I want? Do I want to graduate? Do I want to pass my logic class? Am I just a natural genius at logic and can I just do it without studying? Because some people are just really smart that way. I'm not. I had to actually do my logic homework when I took logic. All of my logic classes. I did take like 3. Actually, I like logic. I shouldn't be like, it's just, you know, there are some people who are just really natural at it, and then there are some people who have to work at it. I'm kind of in between, you know, like I get it, but I still have to work at it. Anyway, this is a tangent. I think I need another drink. But I have to deliberate here, so I'm going to take one more drink because drinking helps me deliberate rationally. Okay. Wow. Hair, totally on point. This is like bed hair that's been in a ponytail all day. Makeup, awesome. I'm going to be, all the boys are going to come. What is it? My milkshake brings all the boys to the yard. My eyeshadow and my bed hair bring all the boys to the yard. Especially that stalker boyfriend of mine. Dude. Looking at my YouTube channel. Stuff. I won't tell you what else he looks at. Because it's none of your business. All right. The wine is kicking it a little bit. I think you can probably tell. Okay, so rational. Do I go to the party or do I study for my logic exam? Well, here's my deliberation. Here's my quote rational process of deliberation. Well, here are the factors I'm going to consider. I'm a Leo. My astrological sign is Leo, and Leos are known to be party animals, and you know we like to do big things, right? We like to be the center of attention. We like to be gregarious and warm and enticing, and Well, I'm just a Leo. There's only one option for me. It's to go to the party. It's the only way I'll be able to express my true self. Therefore, I must go to the party. That is a shit process of deliberation, right? These are not relevant factors. This is just like me pulling some shit out of my ass and saying, I'm going to do X because I'm a Leo. And that's what Leos do, right? I mean, it's just dumb. I'm sorry. That's just dumb, right? That's not a rational process of deliberation. If I told you that's how I made my decision, you'd be like, okay, but what about your logic test? You know they're going to kick you out of your graduate program if you don't pass logic. Be like, but I'm a Leo. You guys would be like, you don't deserve to be in a graduate program if that's your answer, especially a graduate program that requires logic as, that has logic as a requirement. You should probably not do that. Okay? Go be a Leo instead. All right? So, not a rational process of deliberation. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a few examples of what rules of logic dictate in deliberation. So, I want to get ice cream. We're back to that. It could be I want to get wine. I want to get laid. Let's do that one. That is not on the outline, but I'm tired of talking about ice cream. So, I want to get laid. My stalker boyfriend is going to be like, oh, I see. Let me think about this. He's going to deliberate about my wanting to be laid. Okay, at least I hope so. That would be nice. Okay, I'm flirting with my boyfriend who's not even in this class. Welcome to my life. Thank you for playing along. Okay, so suppose I want to get laid. Now, there are certain means to that end, right? A means is just a resource. It's just a way of accomplishing a particular end, right? So you have to spend time. You have to spend money. I mean, if you want to get laid, maybe you have to spend money. I mean, it depends, right? There's lots of different ways to get laid. Oh, now I'm just corrupting the youth seriously here. Oh, God. I haven't even had a full glass of wine yet, and I'm already corrupting you. So means are just ways of accomplishing a particular end. An end is a goal, so I want to get laid. My goal is to get laid. What are the means to that end? Well, there could be lots of them. It depends on which one of your options you choose. Suppose that I settle on one particular option. Okay? This is terrible. I would never do this. But if you have, good for you. I am not a kink shamer at all. No kink shaming here. I have a lot of friends who are very diverse in their interests sexually. And I've never shamed any of them, even though there's some things they do that I wouldn't do, okay? But suppose that the way I decide that I want to get laid is I'm going to go down to the swingers club. There's actually a swingers club in Columbus. Did you know that? Maybe some of you know that, but the only way that I know that is because I had a friend who actually identified as a man whore. Okay? He actually self-identified as a man whore, and he belonged to the swingers club. It's called Princeton. I think it's hilarious. It's named after an Ivy League university. So one day he was talking about going to Princeton. I'm like, did you get into Princeton? I'm like, that's amazing. And he's like, oh no, I mean the swingers club. I'm like, oh, very different. Okay, so suppose that I look at all my options. My boyfriend is like, oh, swingers clubs now. Anyway, so I looked at all my options, and I've decided that my best option, given my life circumstances at this point, is to go down to the swingers club. And I'm going to just get randomly fucked by some person or another. Who says you can only have one? Who says it has to be a guy, right? I mean, it's a free-for-all at the swingers club. I guess. I've never been to one. I've heard stories, though. He used to tell me all kinds of stories. I'm always interested in the stories because the stories are fascinating. But no, not a personal experience that I would prefer to have. But suppose this is the choice I make. Now, a rational way of doing this. Taking the required means to the end. So there are things you just have to do if you're going to go to the swingers club and get laid. What are the things you have to do that are necessary for you to actually go to the swingers club and get laid? Well, you have to go to the swingers club. That's a necessary thing, right? You can't get laid at the swingers club unless you go to the swingers club. That's a necessary thing. So that's a necessary means to the end. So you have to go to the swingers club. Now, you actually have to be a member to be able to go to the swingers club. So you have to figure out how to get a membership. You have to get a member to sponsor you or whatever. I've heard the story of how this happens. I've never done it. But suppose then I'm like, okay, I want to get laid at the swingers club. I mean, it would be easier just to get on Tinder, but whatever. So I want to get laid at the swingers club. So I'm going to figure out how I can get sponsored by a member. So that means I have to find somebody who's already a member. And suppose I don't know somebody who's a member. Well, now I've got these necessary steps I have to take. One, I have to find somebody who's a member who's willing to sponsor me. And from what I've heard, they're willing to sponsor single women all the time. They're just not willing to sponsor single men. They would really prefer to have more women than men there. I wonder why. It's like how these guys have these fantasies about sleeping with a bunch of women at once. Anyway, somebody is going to complain to the department chair at some point about my inappropriate behavior here. I'm just waiting for it. Nobody's done it yet. You guys are like really tolerant. It's great. Okay, so I'm going to have to find somebody to sponsor me to go to the swingers club. And then I'm going to have to go on a sponsor night. So there are special nights where they do the sponsor. And then I'm going to have to like show up there and I'm going to have to, dress appropriately because they have like, dress code, just like any club has a dress code. I mean, I don't know why. I just ended up taking it all off anyway, from what I hear. But okay, so those are necessary things that I have to accomplish before I can go and get laid at the swingers club. Rational deliberation requires taking those necessary means to that end, whatever your end is, right? If you decide, I'm going to go to the swingers club, if I tell you, I'm going to go to the swingers club and get laid, that's my goal, and I'm going to do it like next Friday night, and yet I have done nothing that's required of actually accomplishing that goal, and you're like, okay, well, what have you done? Oh, nothing. I'm just going to show up. You're going to be like, well, that's totally irrational. That's not a rational process of deliberation that you've gone through. You're not going to end up getting what you want, right? You're not going to accomplish your goal. And people do this all the time, right? So they're going to do something. How many people have had a deadbeat partner? I was actually once engaged to this guy who was a total deadbeat. He was really good looking and he was great in bed, but that was all he had going for him. And I can't believe I'm telling you new stories. I would do the same thing in class. That's why my students love me. It's because I'm totally inappropriate. So I was engaged to this guy who was a total deadbeat, and he would tell me he was going to go to chiropractic school. And I'm like, okay, fine, great. Then you need to start, At the time, I was planning on going to medical school. So I already knew, here's the whole process you need to go through if you want to get into a particular kind of school. There are exams you have to take. There are prerequisites you have to do, right? I'm like, I have my shit together. I know this. I've already taken my MCATs. I've already done all my applications, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, dude, you haven't even investigated what chiropractic schools are out there. He's like, yeah, well, why don't you do that for me? I'm like, what part of fuck you do you not understand? This is not my life. It's your life. If you're really serious about this, then you need to take the required steps. Well, to make a long story short, I never married that guy. Thank God. I figured I could get better sex just, without the commitment. But anyway, it's like, I am not going to do this for you. And if I don't do it for you, you're not going to do it for yourself, because do you really want that? And if somebody said, no, I really want that, but they're refusing to take the steps necessary to do that, then you're like, there's something not right here, right? Oh, I really want to do this. You think either he's lying or he's irrational. Okay, so that's a perfect example of somebody who's deliberating in a very non-rational way or irrational way. Here's another thing that's important for deliberating rationally. You can't decide to do things that are inconsistent with one another. So suppose that I want to both go to the swingers club and get laid and go to a church service on the same night. Okay. Suppose that those two things would happen at the same time. It's like, well, I can't be in two places at once. That's just not physically possible. So for me to plan to do both things is totally irrational. It's like, what are you thinking? And if somebody said, look, you can't do both of these things at the same time. You need to decide which do you want to do. Do you want to go to the swingers club or do you want to go to church? Well, no, I'm going to do both. Okay, well, but you have to be at the swingers club from 6 o'clock, and your church service starts at 6 o'clock. You can't get into the, introduction night or whatever. I'm just pretending like I know what's going on there. I don't really. I'm just trying to make it work for this scenario. So suppose they have like this introductory, sponsor night where you go to the swingers club for the first time. Somebody sponsors you, and you have to be there at a certain time. So you have to be there between like 6 and 9 o'clock. But but the church service is from like 6 to 7. It's like if somebody told you they wanted to do this, then you were like, no, I'm going to do both. It's like, no, you don't understand. You have to be here from 6 to 9. And this is from 6 to 7. Those two times overlap. You can't be both places at once. You have to choose. No, I'm not going to choose. I'm going to do both. That is irrational. Okay? This is just an obvious case of irrationality, right? So that's another thing. You can't intend to do or plan to do two things that are inconsistent with one another. There are lots of different ways things can be inconsistent with one another. So being in a monogamous relationship and being a swinger. Okay, that's inconsistent. Getting a PhD and deciding to travel the world. Like, just travel the world for a couple years and do nothing. And get a PhD at the same time. It doesn't work that way. It just doesn't work that way. I wish it did. Oh boy, do I wish it did. That would be so nice. I've been looking on Instagram at a lot of places. I have people that I follow on Instagram who are in Italy, and they always go on these wonderful like weekend vacations around Italy, and they're duck people too. They have ducks, and I have a duck, and duck people like bond. We just bonded. It's like this gay couple in Rome who have these two adorable little ducks, and they're like my best friends now. I mean, not literally, but it feels that way. It's like, oh, it's been a terrible pandemic. Can we be friends? Duck people, like, there's another lady in Connecticut who has ducks that, yeah. Duck people are weird. We'll just be like, yes, great, you love ducks. I love you. Okay, I really want to go to Italy. I'm going to be like, so I have a duck. Can I stay with you? They would probably say yes. They're very nice guys. Okay, so, all right, good. So we have beat that horse to the swingers club and back. All right, so the independence condition, the competence condition. Finally, we have arrived at the authenticity condition. We are now going to talk about the authenticity condition, and I think you will like this very much. Okay. All right, so authenticity condition. A person must have the capacity to discern, big words, discern and personally evaluate their own values, goals, and commitments. Again, that is a shit ton. Let me try to simplify it. I'll just ramble on for another 30 minutes. This is already over an hour. Okay, so I'm feeling kind of cheeky tonight. Sorry. This is what happens when I don't get social engagement. I'm a Leo. I'm going to take up your time and show you how wonderful and warm and wonderful I am. I said wonderful twice because it's extra. I'm so extra. I love wine. Wine is amazing. You have to admit, this is probably more interesting than any other lecture you've ever attended, right? Yeah. I've spent plenty of time in a classroom over the last 20 years. Yeah, I have a lot of degrees. I don't know why. I just keep doing it. I can't stop. I have a problem. Somebody help me. All right, authenticity. What the hell is that? Well, first of all, what are values, goals, and commitments? Well, we've already talked about what values are in Chapter 1. I've already kind of given you a definition of what a goal is as we've gone along, so you should already have an idea of what a goal is, right? I mean, commitment. This is an interesting notion. What is a commitment? And what role does a commitment play in deliberation? Well, we already know what values and goals, how they kind of work into deliberation, but how does a commitment, how does that work? All right, well, a commitment is related to what we value, right? So you're not going to want to commit to something that you don't value. So suppose that I don't really value fashion because I just kind of don't understand it. It's just a little bit, I don't know, beyond me because I'm kind of dumb, right? I'm not going to be committed. I'm not going to be a committed fashionista if I do not understand fashion. Why would I do that? If I don't value fashion, I'm not going to make a commitment to becoming a new, like, Instagram fashion influencer. That would be like torture. I wouldn't do that, right? So whatever you commit to is going to be related to what you fundamentally value. Commitments are cognitive structures. Okay, I know these are big words, but just hang in there with me. Commitments are cognitive structures in the background of our decision making that eliminate certain options from consideration. Now, that's my definition. It's in the outline. Here's how a commitment works. If I value, suppose that I value the way that I look. Suppose that I value, no, I don't really give a shit about how I look most of the time. Unless I'm being cheeky. Suppose that I value human life. A commitment to human life, to upholding. So when we value something, we want to preserve it and protect it and promote it, right? Valuing comes with a certain set of like tendencies. You can't say you value something unless you have a tendency to protect that thing, to promote that thing, right? So if you value human life, you're going to want to protect human life. You're going to want to promote human life. That's just what valuing consists partly in having these behavioral dispositions. So if I value human life, I'm going to be committed to preserving and protecting human life. Which means that whenever I have decisions to make about anything in my life, I'm not even going to consider options that include degrading human life in any form. Those are just not even going to be options for me. So what commitments do is they function sort of in the background of our decision making to eliminate entire sets of possibilities for us. So it's not even possible for me to consider options that would degrade human life. If I'm committed to human life, if I value it and I am committed to it, right? So you can say you value something but not really be committed to it, okay? So I can say I value human life, but I'm going to drive drunk. Okay, well, you're not very committed to it, right? You might say you value it, but you're not committed to protecting and preserving human life if you're going to drive drunk. You're just not, right? So commitments are ways in which we can eliminate certain possibilities, and it's a way to streamline our decision making. It's a way to make our cognitive, to simplify our cognitive activities. The less you have to work with, the less you have to consider things, the easier it is to make the kinds of decisions you need to make. The easier it is to be more efficient in your decision making. So the authenticity condition has to do with what you value and what you're committed to. Now, suppose that you were raised in a religious home. Suppose that you were raised Orthodox Jewish, and I don't know how much exposure y'all here in how much exposure you've had to Orthodox religions, but they're pretty demanding, right? So Orthodox Judaism really governs every aspect of your life, from what you can wear to where you can go, when you can go there, who you can interact with, and how you interact with them, what you can say. Right? So all this talk about swingers club is very naughty. I would be a terrible Orthodox Jew. I actually tried to be more Orthodox and I was very bad at it. Because you also have to be a really submissive woman if you're going to be an Orthodox Jew. And I just couldn't hack it. I'm just like, no, I have a brain and I'm going to use it. And I think that my opinion is better than yours, Rabbi. Okay, but I mean, there are dietary practices, there are clothing choices you have to make. So it governs every aspect of your life. I mean, you even have to pray after going pee. We have to thank God for allowing us to be able to pee. every single fucking time you pee. You have to wash your hands before you eat bread and say a prayer and a blessing before you eat bread. I mean, or anything bread-like. I mean, when you eat fruit, you have to say the blessing for, thank you for giving us fruit to eat. Every fucking thing that goes in your mouth, there's a blessing over it. It is very demanding, right? Okay, but suppose that you were raised that way and that's just become the pattern that you live by. It does, after a while, if you live in that community and your family is constantly practicing a very orthodox kind of practice, that just becomes familiar to you. So suppose that you leave home and you're an adult, you're in college, and you continue to practice your orthodox religion. You eat kosher, you dress in a modest way, you observe the holy days, you fast when you're supposed to, you always, go to prayer 3 times a day. I mean, so you do everything. But suppose you can do that in 2 different ways, right? So you can do that because it's just what you're used to without really putting a whole lot of thought into whether or not you want to continue doing it what are the reasons for you to continue doing that? Or you can actually sit down and reflect on it and say, why am I doing this? I mean, I know I was raised this way and this is what's familiar, but is it the best way for me to live my life? And sometimes it is. Some people are going to say, yeah, actually, I've thought about the reasons why I should continue doing this, and I'm going to continue doing this. That's an authentic choice. So if it's something that you're just doing out of habit, or you're just doing it because that's the way you were raised without really thinking about it, like, I guess I must be Republican because my parents were Republicans, so I guess I'll just register as a Republican. That's how I first voted. How I first registered to vote. I'm like, am I a Republican or Democrat? I have no fucking clue. I guess I'm a Republican because my parents are Republican. I'm a smart kid. I was a smart kid. And I had no idea. I'm like, I don't know how to register. I guess I'll just register as Republican and then vote Democrat. I don't know what I'm doing. But it was one of those things. Like, my political affiliation was something that I hadn't really thought of until all of a sudden I'm confronted with, I've got to register to vote and I don't know how to register. I didn't actually realize they're going to force me to choose to register. So I was like, I guess I'm Republican, and then I voted Democrat. Once I actually looked at who was running and what they stood for, I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm voting for this other guy. Sorry, I have itchy feet. I'm just kind of itchy today. I don't know. I have dry skin. Either that or I have body bugs. Probably just dry skin. Okay, so that's an authentic choice. An authentic choice is one that you actually decide for yourself that that's what you want to do, and you have good reasons for it. You can cite your reasons for it. Okay, so it's taking me an hour to get through this part. I'm probably going to skip some of this other stuff. Okay, so if you satisfy these 3 conditions, you're an autonomous agent. Any choice that you make, if the choice you make satisfies these 3 conditions, so you as a person can satisfy those 3 conditions, and then also the choice that you could make can either satisfy or not satisfy those 3 conditions, right? Was it a choice that was made authentically? Was it a choice that was made without coercion? Okay, then you're an autonomous agent. Yay! What good is that? Well, you're deciding what you want to do with your life. You're maximizing independence and freedom. America, fuck yeah, right? Okay, so this leads us to the implications of traditional autonomy. So traditional autonomy, first of all, is really difficult to achieve. Because it's not the case that we're all going to sit down every single time we have a decision to make and we're going to deliberate about whether or not we're making an authentic choice. Sometimes it's just like, yeah, my family does this, I'm going to continue to do this. I'm not going to think too much about it. Or this is what my society does. I would really like to just sort of fit in socially, so I'm just going to do this thing. Is that authentic? It's questionable. Maybe, maybe not. So traditional autonomy is also about self-determination, maximizing personal freedom and independence, right? And these are very American values. So you might think, well, okay, but is this really a theory of autonomy, or is this a theory of American autonomy? Because you can have different value systems, right? So it looks like there's a value system that undergirds this notion of autonomy, namely it's an American value system. American philosophers developed this. So you might think, well, there might be other value systems that are non-American that might qualify as perfectly acceptable to embrace, which may mean that you don't just sit around and go, what do I want? But it might be, what's best for my society? So it might be that there is a type of autonomy that doesn't look like this. So that's where we get into things like substantive autonomy and relational autonomy. Now, I have really given you sort of a detailed outline for this lecture, so I'm not going to get into this because this lecture is getting long, and you're probably tired of my antics by now. I would be. I get tired of my antics. So there are different kinds of autonomy. So in response to some of these problems with traditional autonomy, namely that, oh, it looks very individualistic and American, well, it is. Are there other ways to be considered an autonomous agent, but don't require you to be so independent and freedom-loving, right? Yes, that's where we get into this discussion of substantive autonomy and relational autonomy. I'm going to let you just sort of go through that on your own. The main thing to get out of this lecture are the three conditions, right? And the kinds of sophisticated capacities that are required in order to satisfy those conditions, okay? I'm going to skip down to moral agency. Now, we've talked about autonomous agency. That's just autonomous agency. It doesn't have anything to do with morality at this point. Where it becomes a moral issue is when you're making moral decisions. So suppose that you make a choice that has some moral consequences. Whether or not we hold you responsible or how responsible we hold you for that moral decision depends on how autonomous that decision was. We tend to assess your level of autonomy when deciding whether or not we should hold you accountable. It's the same thing in a court of law. So suppose that you kill someone. There are lots of different ways that you can end up killing someone. Could be self-defense, could be pure malice. I mean, runs the gamut. It could be an accident, right? So in a court of law, now, law is a different normative domain than morality, okay? Keep those distinct. Sometimes they can overlap. So something that's illegal might also be immoral, but they can come apart, right? So it's often the case that something that's moral might be illegal, but something that's, and vice versa. They can separate, right? So it's not the case that everything that's moral is also going to correspond to everything that's legal. Abortion might be immoral, but it's legal. These things come apart. But I'm using the legal domain as an analogy for how we treat the moral domain. So here's an analogy. In a court of law, suppose that you kill someone. Well, they're going to look at, were you in charge of yourself when you did that? And how in charge of yourself were you, right? So if they're going to charge you with first-degree murder, they've got to prove that you were not only completely in charge of your faculties, you knew exactly what you were doing and you planned ahead, right? You deliberated about this, you chose this, you did it. Guilty as fuck. We're going to put you to death or we're going to put you in prison for the rest of your life. So that's a pretty harsh penalty. If they've decided that you've made a choice autonomously, they're going to give you a much, much harsher penalty than if you were coerced, or if it was accidental and it was beyond your control or whatever. So these are exculpatory factors. They lessen your blameworthiness in the legal domain. Well, those same kinds of things are going to lessen your blameworthiness in the moral domain. So if you do something that's immoral, we're going to be like, okay, well, how much choice did you really have? We are a lot less likely to judge a drug addict as being morally culpable in the same way that we would judge somebody who did the same exact thing out of perfectly rational, deliberative processes. So if I just decided, I'm just going to kill someone. Perfectly rational, deliberative, calculating, evil, psychopathic bullshit. Y'all are going to be like, that was very bad. Morally wrong. But if somebody who's under the influence of drugs and alcohol accidentally kills someone, you're going to be like, oh, you did a morally bad thing, so you're still kind of blameworthy for that, but we're not going to hold you as responsible as we would this psychopath over here who's just a calculating killing machine, right? So how much you are in control of yourself really informs our ideas about how much you should be punished for the things that you do, or how responsible we should hold you, morally or otherwise. So that's one reason why autonomy is kind of an important notion. It's used a lot in law. I mean, like I said, this is a very, very, It's not just America, but it is very, 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 very strong in America. But it's a Western sort of cultural ideology. If you go over to the East, you're going to have some, like the Middle East and in the East, you're going to have like some different ideas about responsibility. And that's more going to be tied to community and social sort of dynamics than it is to individual choices. Okay. I'm not going to get into anything else. I think that I've really covered, I have beat a horse to death today. You're welcome. So I've really sort of covered in detail, in excruciating detail, the things that are the most important to get out of this chapter. But that doesn't mean that I'm not going to possibly quiz you on the things that are actually on the outline and in the book. So make sure that you do look at the rest of this outline, familiarize yourself with the information that's on there. It's also the same information that's in the book, just presented in a little different way. So I'm going to just be done. Okay, because I'm tired and it's been an hour and 20 minutes. And I hope you all have a great weekend. And I will not see you ever. That's so sad. Okay,